Perusal is a free website, and it was designed by a professor at Harvard. And basically, he had the problem that a lot of professors have. His students were not reading for class, and he was very concerned about that. And so he designed this platform, Perusal, to try to get his students to read more. It's perusal.com for those of you that are searching for it now. And so what I do in my class is every week for the Introduction to Bilingual Education class, the students have to read something in Perusal. I upload the documents, and they will do all their reading in there. Now, before I get any doubts, those of you that use a textbook and you're worried about copyright, if you decide to adopt Perusal, Perusal has deals with a lot of major publishers. Chances are, if you are using an English textbook from a publisher, students can buy the textbook through Perusal, and there are no copyright issues. In my course, I'm using all free material from the internet, so I just upload the PDFs. They could get that on websites, so it's not a problem. Perusal also does videos, so if you use videos in your class, you can put the videos in Perusal as well. So the first thing I do is I make sure that I choose an accessible text. Because it's a heavy topics in my course, I try to find a text that is going to give them maybe the basis of what we're going to talk about so we can go deeper in my class. So I want to make sure that they get a general idea. And so I go into, for my course, Psychology Today has a blog, Life as a Bilingual. And they talk about a lot of the topics. It's just 2 pages, and it fits my syllabus pretty well for about maybe half or more of the topics. So I give them something that's accessible and something that they can read. So I specifically choose the text. But if you want to use your textbook, you can too. But here's the beauty of Perusal. It's not that they have deals with publishers and I can upload things. It's that students can engage with the text, with their classmates, and with me before they come to class. So they read, they can highlight things, and they engage, just like on social media. So how does this help? It helps in 2 ways. It helps my students, and it helps me. So the first one, students engage in discussions. We can see here, I think these are interesting findings, especially for the research about blah, 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 Alzheimer's disease. And this person says, oh, I agree. You know, the fact about being bilingual gives opportunities to train, they said, cognitive execution function. Not sure if that's a misguided thought, but it's something I take note of. But they're engaging with the text before they come. They're already having conversations about our topic before they come to my class. And they're also, also starting to present some doubts that I'm actually going to solve in class. Maybe it needs different systems of language. In other words, do the languages, the bilingualism, the 2 languages affect cognition? They're already starting to get on this topic that I've already planned to talk about in class. They come ready. So the discussion part is good. They're already starting to engage with the topic. But you know what's even better? The questions part. When students are in the text and they say, I'm confused. I don't understand this concept of dialect that's being talked about in this article. I also have the same question. I'm confused about this part of the article. And then here comes a student to save the day. They looked up this idea of dialect in the dictionary. They talked about what it meant and then made an interpretation of the article. And you can see that there is a +1. I went in and said, that's the right answer. I pressed it so that others, when they get to the article, if they hadn't opened it up already, they can take a look, and if they have the same confusion, see the answer. So questions often and misunderstandings get taken care of before they get to class. But it's never always perfect. Sometimes my students engage in conversations about the text that do not match the text. There are confusions. So for example, the particular text for everything for this presentation comes from the Cognition and Bilingualism unit. And the article I gave them was basically a scholar casting doubt on all of the positive cognition research. And the idea was that, are we trying to sell bilingualism? Is that what the purpose of this research is? Or is it to really understand the nature? So that was the essence of the article. It was supposed to have the students come in ready to challenge a lot of the research around cognition and bilingual education. In other words, are we inflating the advantages? My students were talking about cram schools. They were talking about, yeah, we try to sell English in Taiwan through cram schools. Not what that was about at all. But you know what? I was ready when I went into class to address it. I already knew where they went wrong in the readings, and I could attack it right at the beginning of class to make sure that they understood the purpose of the reading. Perusal is very powerful. It's very powerful because students engage with the reading more than just reading. They have conversations about it with their classmates, and it helps me know where my students may be going wrong so that I can address those issues when they come to me, not after the exam. So I come in with a lot of data about my students. Now, does this take time? It can. I usually get to my class about 20 minutes early. I like the 8 o'clock slot in the morning. My students don't. But I usually open up perusal about 20 minutes beforehand, and I scroll through and I try to find things that I may need to address. So I don't necessarily spend a lot of time, but I do have to put time into my schedule. Okay? If you have TAs and you want to train your TAs to do this and then to give you maybe just a quick report before you go into class, that's an option too. But it takes time to train your TAs. So you've got to make sure your TAs know a lot about your subject and can identify the issues. But either way, even if you just spend 5 minutes scrolling through, there is a confusion report. It's a very powerful software. You can click a confusion report and it'll give you like a summary of certain things. So there's a time saver there. You could have your TA just print out a spreadsheet. It'll make a spreadsheet for you and you can walk to class reading it if you like. There are ways. So I don't want to discourage you from using this software because of the time issue. You can put as much or as little into it as your schedules allow. Okay? Do they understand my lecture? Even with my star, highly motivated, brilliant, future bilingual teachers. And I mean that. I am very lucky. But I worry about this. And so, how do I deal with it? The first thing is, and I meant to bring the book so you could look at it after, but I forgot. It's in my office. The first thing I do is I divide my lecture into sections. I have this book in my office, so those of you that are on the NTNU campus, if you want to come take a look, just shoot me an email, and I can make a time to meet you in my office so you can flip through it. The book is called Interactive Learning, and it was not designed for EMI, but wow, will it work in EMI if you do it? So one of the things, they have lots and lots of strategies for making your lecture interactive. But one of the things that I think is very helpful is divide your lecture into sections. Now, they get pretty complicated with it. They call it bookends, overlays, and interleaves. So basically, bookend is a start and a finish. Bookends like on a bookshelf. Overlays, lecture plus guided notes. And they talk about all these strategies in the book. And then interleaves. pauses. I don't know if you've noticed, but in each section, I'm giving you time to talk with each other about things that I'm talking about. It's strategic. I want to get you thinking about the topic. If I said something before that question, I just gave you a time to talk to the person next to you and be like, what'd that guy just say? I do this in my class. Now, I don't get as complicated as the book. I'm not, with my new classes, I've got a lot of things to think about, okay, designing the curriculum. And so I made an easier version. This is what my class looks like at the bottom. Discuss the reading. I already talked about how I do that. Discuss the reading. Make sure that they get updated kind of on what they were supposed to know when they came into class. Then I do about a 15-minute lecture. I do not time myself. So basically when I get to this lecture part, I do one of two things. I design within my lecture points like I've done with this one, where there are stops where they can discuss a question or something, or I'm constantly looking at my students, and when I get the sad eyes or the confused eyes, I stop. It's like, oh, we've gone too far. And I do an impromptu, talk to your partner. Because sometimes I get that. Like, I'll be talking about something complex, I'll be really excited about it, and then I see on the faces it's not getting through. So I pause. I just stop myself and I say, talk to the person next to you. Just update them on what I just said. Okay? Take about 30 seconds to a minute. And then I ask any questions, and we move on. And so that's basically what I do. Lecture, tell partner what we just discussed. Lecture, tell partner what we just discussed. Lecture, and then how does this, because I teach pre-service teachers, how does this affect you as a teacher? Trying to make it relevant at the end. Okay? So this is a way that I pace myself because I get excited and love to talk about my topic. But it's also more important than that. It's a chance for students who feel lost in the lecture to get caught up so that they don't have to feel lost for 2 hours. They get what they need from their friend. I let them speak Chinese. Well, I don't really get in the way. I let them speak Chinese. I never say anything about it. Because what's most important here is that they get on the same page. I don't care what language they speak. I care that they figure out what I just said if they didn't already know it. Or sometimes when both partners know it, one partner says one thing, I don't think that's what he said. And they correct misunderstandings before they get to me. And usually what happens, I've done this semester, I've done several EMI talks. And sometimes people say to me, and we'll talk about it in the next question, my students never say anything in class, they never ask me questions. I tend to get questions after each one of these breaks. There's always at least one person that will ask a question after these breaks because they figured out something with their classmate that wasn't working. Now maybe my students are just very motivated and more willing to ask questions, but I think there's something about this technique, giving them time to process what just happened before we move on. We're talking about concepts and we're only using language. That can be hard when you're only receiving English through your ears. So I try to emphasize important things so that they can hear and read simultaneously. And I'm sure many of you do that too. You probably use PowerPoint slides and you put the important things on the slides. And that's a good start. Also, what I try to do is I try to use general language to bridge to academic language. They have to be exposed to the academic language. That is the purpose of higher education, to bring them into our academic discourse community. But they may not be ready immediately. So we find ways to maybe bridge that when we're talking. But we also need to put some visuals. I try not to ever give my students a slide just of text. So if I am doing this hearing and reading simultaneously, I try to make sure that there is something, some diagram, some picture like I have here that can be used to help support that. And so I'm very conscious of making sure that my slides have things for them to grab onto more than just my words. I also do a lot of things with my voice. I try to speak louder on some things, softer, and I pause. Silence is important too, especially for me because I love to talk fast. Sometimes the silence can make a big impact, and oh, I need to make sure I pay attention. So we use this idea of sound to try to help their comprehension too. Gestural is about using body movements. I try to never just stand behind the podium. I know this is a safe place. It feels safe and warm, and it's like home. But if I have the privilege of having a beautiful room like this with a big screen, then I can use gestures to point their attention. Because oftentimes when they see all this text, and maybe even you saw all this text, and I'm like, I'm not reading that. I probably would have been like that if I was in the audience. I'm not going to read all of those things. But if someone points something out and says, can I demonstrate this with body movements, or pointing to important information, it's going to help with my comprehension. It's going to help draw my attention. The last thing, and I'm going to move on from this slide, is this idea of spatial. I am a somewhat user of Mandarin Chinese, and as part of my work, I find myself often in meetings or presentations that are all in Mandarin Chinese, and I've got to understand. And so, in many ways, my life here is a lot like students in an EMI course. I get to live it on a regular basis. One thing that helps me is when there's a lot of space on the slides, rather than just packing it with text. Because I can't read that fast in Chinese. I can read in Chinese. I scored B2 in 2012, so yay me. But I can't read that fast. And so sometimes I try to make sure I don't put too much on one slide. I make sure that there's space. Now this slide is a bad example. You're probably thinking, you didn't do spatial on this. You're right, I didn't. I tried to pack everything in. So here's the strategy I use in my class with my highly motivated students. I ask a question. I let them talk like I've let you talk. Think, pair, share. Think about it. Talk with the people next to you. And then I cold call. I've got my roster on my desk, on my little podium, and I cold call. And I mark when I call on people so that I call on everyone at some point, not necessarily during the same class, but throughout the semester. Everybody's going to have to talk in my class. I cold call. But I want to emphasize why I do the think, pair, share before that. Because I don't want any of my students to feel like they can't answer something. Because honestly, there's nothing worse than somebody calling on you, cold calling on you, and you not having an answer, or not being ready to be called on. We all know that as adults. Like if I called on one of you right now, you would hate me. And the students feel the same way. But they feel less anxiety if they've had a chance to practice it first. And they feel less anxiety if they've had a chance to think. Because what normally happens with someone that cold calls in a higher education, I'm going to ask you this question, you tell me the answer. No time to think. And That's even harder in a language that is not your dominant language. And I think we all know that as bilinguals. So I go through this process, and I can tell you, I have yet to have a student cry in my class. That's one. But I've yet to have a student not answer my question. We're halfway, we're week 8 now, I think, week 9, somewhere in that ballpark. I have yet to have a student not answer my question in class. And they're extended answers. They're not one-word answers. They talk. They talk to me. So we have to ask ourselves the question, is the issue the students, or is it the way we're asking the questions in our EMI courses? Because I did this in the US too. And even the girl that was watching the World Series, I think they lost that day. Not that it matters. But she left class sad. But she will also, when I do think, pair, share, she's not going to not talk to her classmate. That would be pretty rude. She'll go away from the game for a second and talk, and then when I call on her, she'll be able to answer a question. So I think we have to recognize that, just generally speaking, and I'm only going to talk about undergraduates right now because graduate students are different. As an undergrad, it can be very awkward to answer a question in any university class or ask a question. But if we give them time and we set them up for success, you'll get the answers you want. And as I had said, I often get impromptu, like non-cold call questions every time I do the tell your partner what we discussed. Every time. Somebody will raise their hand and ask a question. Now, that part may be my highly motivated, brilliant pre-service teachers that are going to be bilingual teachers soon. That part, I will admit that that may be special about them. But I would bet in some classes you would get that too. But the cold call part, I think that could work with anyone because they can set themselves up for success. So every class on Moodle, they are expected to do an exit ticket. It's part of their grade. It's something they know they have to do every week. And it's very simple. I ask them, tell me 3 things that you learned. Tell me 2 ways this can be used. And tell me 1 question you still have. Every class. You can do this in Google Forms, but I'm going to tell you, I tried that at the beginning of the semester, and students said, I swear I submitted it. I really did. Why didn't you get my... So I switched to Moodle. Moodle is not as easy to use, but I used the feedback function in Moodle, and I was able to make a template, so it became very easy to set it up every week. As easy as Google Slides. But there was a learning curve. And then there's no excuses. They see if it was submitted or not. So I solved that problem, letting you know that so you don't have that problem yourself. I do one other thing. And this is going to kind of connect to the next part of the talk. But before this, I always have objectives for my class. And I ask them to rate their objectives. Like, how well do you feel you can do this? And so that's also added. What's great about this is it's super easy to implement. This is one of those things that if you really wanted to, I don't think you could make it compulsory at this point because the students would say you're so unfair. But it's something that you could do in your class tomorrow in a Google form. And it answers the questions or the problems here. Students' English level, you'll find out real quick. That was very Texas of me. I didn't use the ly on quick. And forgive me, English teachers. You'll find out very quickly their level by the way they answer the question. But more importantly, because it is not your job to teach them English, it is your job to teach them content. What you probably care about most is, did they understand? And oh my, sometimes you will get some very special answers on your exit ticket, like, I did not say that. But they are convinced they learned it. That happened the first week of the semester. Some of those answers were the exact opposite of what I said. I was very concerned about the future of bilingual education. What are these teachers thinking? I think I've corrected them since then. But I do want to show you how I can use this data, because I know a lot of you are concerned about your time. Okay? So as I told you, at the beginning, I always have a question. How do you feel about the objective of today's lecture? So for this particular lecture, how well can you discuss research on bilingualism and its relation to cognition in the brain? And you can see the bottom, it's kind of small. You can't see. Cannot do this even with help. That's the first thing. And you'll see nobody put that. So I can feel confident that my students at least learned something. That's good. If I open up my Moodle and do the quick analysis, because this takes 30 seconds to look at, and I see some things here, I know there's problems. And if you have a TA, maybe TA sends some emails to those people. Hey, do you want to come to office hours? I can help you. Okay? The next one is I can do this if I have help. So we've got a substantial amount of people here. So they feel like, I would use the word emerging. They feel like they've got some of this, but they need more support. Okay? And I keep that in mind. We might want to offer, if we have TAs, have an optional session for them. Come in and see if we can correct some of your misunderstandings. I mean, I highly recommend you're paying them, use your TAs. They can do more than grade. Can do this by myself. This is the good one. Look at that. The majority of my students felt like they could do this by themselves. That is a good place to be. Honestly, that's where I want my students. Because the last one, I can do this by myself and help others. I don't want that too high because they'll take my job. But no, jokes aside, this is good too. That means that they feel really confident about the topic. But as long as I've got most people on the can do this by myself, I feel like we had a good lecture, that my students are on track. If it looks different than this, then maybe I need to rethink some things, some targeted interventions, or I might need to build in some time to my next lecture to maybe go over some things. But I have those open-ended questions too. And if you're short on time, and all of us are, you're all very busy people. Sometimes this is the best we can look at. My syllabus has the objectives. And when I designed, I thought about, with my entire bilingual certificate program, I have outcomes. What do these teachers need to leave? I have 7 competences. When they leave the program, I hope they're on the path towards achieving those at proficient levels. Can't do everything, but I want them on the path. I have 7 competences that I took from the literature. Then across my courses, thinking of those competences, I said, this course is going to target this is going to target this, and then I created objectives, the small pieces of those competences. So I've done, again, I'm in a privileged situation, I've done the curriculum mapping of my bilingual education certificate program, because I can. Lucky me. For you, it's going to be a little bit harder, but you can always be very clear about what exactly should my students do when they leave this classroom. First one, bilingualism. They should be able to contrast various views regarding what it means to be bilingual, because there's lots of definitions. I want them to be able to contrast those. So creating your objectives, very clear. Yeah, 1 minute over. A final word, because I want to give you time for questions. Some of these strategies are easier to implement than others. The exit ticket, the talk to your partner 1 minute. I want you to know that I understand. You and me, we live the same lives. We are busy people. Some busier than others, but we're all very busy. No one expects you to do all of this in your class tomorrow or next week, or even this semester. I've shared with you today my class and how I thought about designing it. And I've come up with these strategies and things over time, teaching EMI to Taiwanese students for a while now. But what I want you to do is I want you to pick one. Pick one that you liked today. I hope you liked one. But pick one, just one. And in the next 2 weeks, not even tomorrow, not even next week, but in the next 2 weeks, commit to trying one thing. Give your students 1 minute to talk in class. Just do that. See what happens. See how it feels. When you get comfortable with that, maybe next semester, try another. Next year, try another, and build it up. If you have a chance to get this book, get the book. Pick one strategy in there and try it. And leave the others for another semester. Because that's what teacher development is about. That is what all of us are going through. Every year, we get better. But we take one step at a time. EMI is hard. It's a lot of challenges. But we can do it. I believe we can do it.
Bilingual education is not to ask subject teacher to teach English. Subject teacher need to teach your subject content. If you are from health education, what you need to teach is health education, the content, the knowledge, skills, and attitude related to health education. You shouldn't teach health education as English. You shouldn't teach health education as English. What does that mean? If you are introducing the body parts to your student, that is part of the health education in 7th grade in junior high school. They have a lot of difficult terminology, related to different organs or body parts. You don't need to force your students to memorize those difficult words. If you force your student to memorize those words, or even you tell your student, look at the sentence pattern I use, it's imperative sentence. That's English, that's teaching English. That is not teaching health education. Okay? So, the emphasis of bilingual education should not sacrifice students' subject knowledge. When you do your subject teaching with 2 languages, you are providing student bilingual environment only, but you are not teaching English. Bear in mind, that's the crucial point. Okay, so let us skip the rest of the video. So how can we help students become bilingual? That is another essential question we need to ask when we promote bilingual education in schools. Language is used for communication purpose. But in the past, when we teach students language, especially English language, we make them as a school subject. So we always ask for correctness, right? But in bilingual lessons, we are not focused on the correctness. We focus on if the students are willing to use 2 languages to communicate with me in my class. I can give you an example. You will realize what I'm talking about. A few months ago, I was in a classroom observing the bilingual performance arts teacher teaching performance art. And the teacher was asking the student, what kind of play do you like? Because students, 7th graders, they don't know the vocabulary performance. So the teacher used play, P-L-A-Y, play to instead. So the teacher asked the students, what kind of play do you like? And the student answered, I like to watch horseplay. What is horseplay? Horseplay, horse, the animal horse. Pardon me? Yes, exactly. And the teachers also understand. So they do have communication. And the teacher say that, oh, horseplay, you mean circus. So the teacher actually introduced the word to the student. Okay, so the student say horseplay. and the teacher introduced the correct words. But if now you are in a foreign country, you are looking at something you don't understand, or you are looking for something, you don't know how to say that in English, you can use different words to describe it, to achieve the goal of communication, to make others understand what you want to say. Same thing happened in the classroom. They are doing communication, and the teacher bring in the correct English words after they have this communication. Okay. And then school need to do a good bilingual environment. And the school need to realize that change takes time. Okay? And these are the principles. I did mention this in my previous sharing. The students use classroom English and do not keep translating their words from time to time. And don't use, jing jing ti. You know what jing jing ti is? So you need to pardon me. I need to say some jing jing ti, so you understand what it is. 今天看到各位同学这么认真上课，我觉得非常的 happy. That's 晶晶体. That means you mix English words and Chinese words in the same sentence. Yeah. Okay. Don't use that in bilingual instruction. You need to give students the whole sentence in English or the whole sentence in Chinese.